Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jim Wynn, and I'm CEO of Imagine Education, a company in the UK. I apologize for not speaking any Latvian, but I understand there is simultaneous translation. If anybody thinks I'm going too quickly, will somebody shout and say slow down or whatever? Last week I was reminded of just how important teachers' jobs are. I was contacted by an ex-student of mine who I taught in 1989, a guy called Richard Morgan. Richard is now 46 years old and runs a team at Gatwick Airport in the UK. And he emailed me to say he'd just taken on a big job and was running a team of people. And he remembered something that I'd said in one of my maths lessons when I was teaching mathematics about how to organize groups of people. So 28 years ago, and he still remembered. And I was doing the arithmetic before, and I think we have something like 900 people here today. And so you guys will influence at least 250,000 Latvians in your teaching career. That responsibility is amazing. Now, for him to remember me is one thing, but in preparing for today, I was thinking back to a student, a guy called Jamie Uglow, who I knew for a completely different reason, because he was really naughty. I was a head teacher, and he would often be in my office, and finally we brought in his mum, Jenny Uglow. And in talking to Jenny, I realized that she actually was a really interesting person as a parent. It turned out that she's an author, and she wrote a book called The Lunar Men. In 1760, 5 men in the Midlands in England used to meet once a month by the light of the moon. And the reason why they met by the light of the moon is because in 1760 there weren't street lights, so they had to get home after going to the pub. So they went home by the light of the full moon. And I knew I'd forget this, so I'm just going to go through the names. I wonder if anybody recognizes any. These 5 men were Bolton and Watt, Darwin, Priestley and Wedgwood. Priestley discovered oxygen. Bolton and Watt invented the steam engine. Darwin was the granddad of the Darwin we all know. And Wedgwood made amazing pottery. These 5 people used to meet and talk about ideas. And the ideas turned into things which Jenny argued changed the world. She argues in her book that just these 5 people meeting together created the Industrial Revolution, which changed the world. That's worth thinking about. It isn't, sometimes we feel that we don't make a difference when we're just by ourselves, or maybe talking to a few colleagues. But she argues in the book, I'd buy it, The Lunar Men, that 5 people changed the world. Now, fast forward to today. That was the first Industrial Revolution. People talk about different industrial revolutions, but I don't know, is anybody aware of what people are calling the Industrial Revolution today? They're calling it the 4th Industrial Revolution. And I think this is going to bring the biggest pressure on teachers of any of the other industrial revolutions. The first Industrial Revolution created the need for schools so that children knew things. People were quite ignorant. They just knew how to farm the land and they knew how to get by in the 18th century. But as the Industrial Revolution started, we needed workers who knew about things. They knew how to make things and so on. They needed knowledge. So the school system that was set up soon after that in the 19th century was all around knowledge. And we're still there today, aren't we? We have subjects. We teach people about stuff. The 4th Industrial Revolution, let me explain it from the idea of a drone. We all know what drones are. Now, drones have come about because someone found a new way of making an electric motor that's really tiny and light. Somebody else has made a computer that's so small you can put it on a tiny chip and it doesn't weigh much. And somebody else made some batteries that were really light as well. Individual things going on which add up to an amazing thing called a drone. Now, what do you think about drones? But the point is, it's a mashup. It's different people with different experiences coming together. So what I think we need to think about as teachers now. In the past, you used to get a job for what you knew. In the future, according to Andreas Schleicher of the OECD, you'll get paid for using what you know, not just knowing things. It's almost like knowledge itself has become commoditized and it's worthless because you can look things up. But it's the people who are able to bring different bits of knowledge together are the people that are going to be powerful in the future. People who are flexible. And I don't know if you saw recently, there was a series of YouTube videos about nerds. You know, the people who go into corners and do things. And one of these guys, I think he was about 18, said, "I'm a nerd, one day you'll work for me. I'm a nerd, one day you'll work for me." We need to sort of change the way we think. Applying what you know has another implication itself. It implies that you can't work by yourself anymore. It implies that if you want to get the person who's made the electric engine and the person who's made the battery, you need skills that enables you to work in groups. Just like the lunar men did, they worked together and they changed the world. So schooling in the past has really been about making you as an individual build your knowledge capital so you became useful when you entered society and entered the world of work. But what's missing is the ability for people to enter teams and to work in groups, just like the lunar men did to actually change the world. So I think we need to actually really think about these ideas, but they're not new. Do you remember back in the 80s, I can't see your faces, I'm sure some people are as old as me, or do you remember the song, "It Ain't What You Do, It's the Way That You Do It"? Do you remember it? Can anybody sing it? I'll give them a prize if anybody can sing it. Emma? "It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it, and that's what gets results." Remember? That's what this is about. It's not what you know, it's what you do with it that is important. How many people have heard of Kafka, Gestalt psychologist? Have you heard of Kafka? One hand. I'll give you a prize at the end. I've got a prize with me, okay? Will you remember? Kafka is misquoted. He's misquoted as saying, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." The truth is, what he said was, the whole is other than the sum of its parts, which is a much deeper statement. When you work together, you get something which is different and exciting. I put this, my wife keeps bees. This is a picture from our beehive. And it's a great metaphor because honeybees can't live by themselves. They need to be part of a community, all with their own jobs working together. They cannot exist by themselves. So when you add up all those parts, you get something which couldn't have existed before. And I think as teachers, we make one big mistake. We don't talk to other teachers enough. We aren't very good at forming communities. I think it's because we're all busy. But there are, if we can work like honeybees, we could make something much more different. So I think the situation that we have today is that the most successful people in the world are people who can perform well in different circumstances and with different people. I can see people taking pictures of the screen. I'm sure these slides will all be made available afterwards, so don't worry. Just you can take them and steal them. It's the best compliment you can give anybody. I think so why isn't this working in school? Why aren't we able to help people with their behavioral skills that you need when working with other people? And I think it's all because of assessment. I think we know how to assess skills, the fact I can do fractions or name long rivers. We have examination systems that do that quite well. And then we ask people to talk about our behaviors. Now, I've got a good metaphor from nursing, because I'm working with the Royal College of Nurses in England about nurse behavior. Imagine a situation where you go to a course and you learn all about how to show empathy to your patients as a nurse. And you discuss it, you understand it, and at the end of the course you take an exam and you get an A grade because you know all about empathy. Does that mean you will show empathy when you go on the hospital ward? Doesn't mean that at all. So that summative assessment of a behavior doesn't tell you anything about changing that person's behavior. So it's about assessment, I think. And I think if I want to assess me for my way I'm talking, I have to do it now, at the point I'm doing it. There's no point talking about it next week or the week after. So we invented a phrase which we stole from retail. You know how in retail, do you have reward cards? You know, I've just flown across by British Airways. I've got my British Airways reward card. I use it and I get points. You've all got reward cards, haven't you? I'm trying to get some feedback here, guys. I'm going to keep you in detention unless I get some feedback. Okay, we need to... have you got reward cards? Yeah, of course we have. When you use the reward card, does it get in the way of the process of the sale? It's pretty instant, isn't it? They've worked it out so that they get that information, which is so important. Imagine if in your teaching, you could give somebody a reward that didn't get in the way of the teaching. Instead of calling it point of sale, we'll call it point of learning. Giving rewards at the point of learning. And I think that we need point of learning systems to help develop behaviors. Because when we see a good behavior, we want to say, well done, let me give you a credit. Or even better, wouldn't it be great if you could give yourself a credit? Because you've just done something which you're trying to develop yourself. So I think the solution is to invent point of learning systems. A good friend of mine, Dr. Tariq Shawki, used to be in charge of ICT for education at UNESCO in Paris. And I met him about 15 years ago. And 3 years ago, this very week, he had been promoted to be the President of Egypt's Special Advisor for the future of education in Egypt. Huge job. And he rang me and said, Jim, I want to run a workshop for my committee, my council. Can you come and run a workshop on what's happening and where we should be thinking about the future? Now, this is a fantastic opportunity. Just say what you really believe and, start again. So this is the slide I presented to that group. And I was talking at government level. It's a big country, Egypt, 1.2 million teachers, 22 million students. So I talked about, first of all, you've got to understand what your need is. What are you trying to do with your education system? And there's an amazing book called The Atlas of Economic Complexity, which looks at every single country in the world, and it looks at the supply chain for different products. Now, really interestingly, in the book, they compare Egypt to Switzerland. And Egypt and Switzerland both export just under 200 major products each. Yet Switzerland is 88 times richer than Egypt. All of the products in Egypt that they export are low complexity products, grain, food. All of the products in Switzerland are complex products, watches and so on. The guy who's written this book, Houseman, argues that the reason why Egypt is producing lots of low complex products is because of the nature of the education system not turning out students who could even be employed in a factory making watches. So the challenge is, where do you want your economy to go? Which products do you want to develop, and what can you do about it? And I'm not talking about training everybody to make watches. It's actually trying to train people to want to make watches. So first of all, identify the need. Now, I don't know if you've come across Hanusek. Hanusek has been writing books about the knowledge capital of nations and linking that to the economy. And you've all heard of PISA. So he proves that the higher PISA results you get, then the better the economy will be. So there's a very traditional view about knowledge capital, skills, in other words. But the most important book that I've read in the last 10 years is the last one, Creating a Learning Society. Joseph Stiglitz is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. And he looked at Burkina Faso and South Korea in the 1960s. They were both the poorest countries in the world in just 1960. It's not that long ago. So Burkina Faso today is still more or less where it was, and South Korea isn't. And the one reason, he says, that South Korea developed in the way it did was because every product that they developed, they created communities of practice that wanted to make the best they could and look around the world. And if they were making a car or making a fridge or a television, as they do now, they were going to make the best. And so he talks in this about a learning society where everybody in society wants to learn to be the best. Now, this is different to lifelong learning. My wife has decided to retire and keep bees, so she went on a beekeeping course. That's lifelong learning. She wanted to do something different. This is about, if you're making sausages, you want to join the sausage society and learn how to make the best sausages. So this frame of mind is really important. So I argued with Dr. Tarek that unless the teachers had the frame of mind of working together, then the students wouldn't have the frame of mind of working together. So we have to be able to get teachers working collaboratively in communities of practice, then the students will work in communities of practice because they'll be taught that way. So we said, Tarek, if you want to have a smart nation, you need to do two things. You need to build your knowledge capital, because I hope you don't get me wrong, I'm not saying knowledge is unimportant, it's very important, but you also need to build a learning society next to it. So that's the equation. So let's break that equation down a little bit and see how it pans out. Now, I have to say this periodic table is a really interesting way of producing these ideas, because we can group the elements in different ways. So the first group of elements are the political elements. Do you want to have a smart nation? How much money are you going to invest in knowledge capital? How are you going to build a learning society? Those are challenges to the government. But looking vertically, we need to think about these ideas of how do I assess need? How do I know the skills that I want? And if you go down to element 5, that's about individual people. How do you get the knowledge you want? How do you get the knowledge you want to suit you in your interests? So the enabling environment for the government is, how do I produce some way that I can get what I want? How do I personalize my learning experience? In fact, what they've done in Egypt is that they've created something called the Egypt Knowledge Bank. And they have 30 publishers' sets of materials in Egypt. And if you have an Egypt IP address, you can go to the Egypt Knowledge Bank and download anything free of charge, because it's already paid for upfront by the government. And that's costing the government tens of millions of dollars a year, but it's making sure that if you really want to develop your skills, you can go and get it. But the thing that's missing is the learning society part. So what does that mean? Well, it means identifying in element 6 the communities that the government wants to develop and enabling them to collaborate together to make them better teachers or nurses or whatever. In fact, we argued that if we could train 10,000 teachers around their behaviors, we would impact 1 million students. That's going back to my first comment, that when we're teachers, we sometimes forget that the students do actually listen. You do influence them with your actions, and how you act is as important as what you're doing. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. It's really important that we understand that they will remember. And like I say, you will impact some 250,000 students yourselves. So we decided as a company to focus on the behaviors column. And because our background is in education, even though that behaviors column is about all aspects of society, we decided to look at teachers. And so it got the name Teachers First, because it'll be nurses next, and lawyers last, we always say, but now that's another story. We started to look at what was happening in the world around behaviors, and it's amazing what's happening. Delta Airlines have got a book that they give all their staff called Rules of the Road, which describe the behaviors for their staff when dealing with customers. The British Civil Service has policy all around behaviors inside that book. The International Red Cross. You know, you're in a disaster situation and someone's broken their leg or lost their family, and you go in as an aid worker and you know how to mend their leg, but what's equally important is how you deal with that person. What's your behavior when you're actually working with that person? In fact, I often ask people in non-education audiences to think of a teacher that taught them and think of a word that describes that teacher. And I do this all the time. No one ever says, I remember Jim because he was good at maths. They say, I remember Jim because he cared for me. They remember your behavior more than they remember the content. All the way across the board. So we've approached the Open University in the UK and we said to them, do you think there's something in this idea? And lo and behold, they wrote a paper around this concept of point of learning being a necessary component for changing behaviors. In fact, when you start digging, you find that the OECD have been talking about behaviors since 1992 and saying that we really need to learn from South Korea and others about how we have to embed that. So in education speak, it's about cognitive knowledge capital, non-cognitive behaviors is what we need to develop people. It's not one or the other, it's both. So we invented a framework for describing behaviors. So there are behaviors under certain headings, like communication behaviors, teamwork behaviors, and so on. And we wanted teachers to be able to give themselves a credit with their learning credit card. So all the teachers in Egypt now get a learning reward card. This is an actual one. And it took us 6 months to get the president's logo on the back, but we got that. And this is it's an NFC card. You can tap it on a phone, and the phone will actually recognize the fact you've tapped it. And we created this structure for behavior. So when you get your phone out, you haven't got to search for 10 minutes for the behavior. You can just find it in 2 or 3 taps. And when you get to that behavior, you can give yourself a credit. Or you can say to a colleague, do you think I've just done this thing? And you can get a peer credit. And we generate patterns of credits. And I'm going to show you sort of the behaviors that people are crediting. And we've suddenly found that people want us to talk about this in other regions, like in call centers and dentists and so on. So we have an app, and we have cards, and we have a website where you can share your evidence as well. So just to be clear, here's a made-up example of a behavior level, communicate. That's the heading. Level 2 are the behaviors that we want to develop. So one behavior might be debate constructively, decide definitively, and supportively act. But that's quite a complicated sentence. So what we want to do is break that down into little granules that you can really say that you've done. All concerned can express their views. So if you're running a meeting and you let people express their views, you can give yourself a credit. Or you can say to a colleague, do you think I let people express their views in the meeting and get a peer credit? So as you build up your ticks for the granules, you can then make out that you are actually beginning to gain those behaviors. We worked in a primary school with 9-year-old students. And the school wanted to actually develop, I hope you can read that, different dimensions in the students. So the first dimension was effective learning. So that's like the big area, the big topic area. Then they wanted to help the children want to develop new learning or apply what you know or learn from your mistakes. So learning from your mistakes, if you can see, tries again when something goes wrong. So the students, we made this framework, we gave the 9-year-olds cards, which the teacher put on the wall with Velcro, and when a student thought themselves that they'd carried out one of those granules, they could give themselves a credit. And the students, we said to them, should we extend it home? maybe we should extend the framework so you could have things like, I made my bed, I tidied my room. And they got really enthusiastic because there's no negative in this, it's always positive. So I wondered if you had to change one behavior of all teachers in Latvia, has anybody got an example? Maybe you can chat for 2 minutes to someone sat next to you. If there was one behavior that every teacher in Latvia carried out that would make all teaching better, because I think I know one. Can you have 2 minutes, have a chat about, with your neighbor, or just think yourself if you're by yourself, what behavior would you just wave a magic wand and have all teachers do in Latvia? You can talk now, it's fine. 10? Okay. Okay. All right, does anybody want to offer a... Okay, class, the talking's over now. Okay. I'm afraid I can't see people up there because of the lights. Okay. Right, has anybody got... Shh, thank you. See, it worked. It worked. Have you seen the technique, by the way, that if you want your class to be quiet, you say be quiet, and the first child who hears you puts their hand up. And then if other children see somebody with their hand up, they put their hand up, and within a few seconds, everybody's quiet. It's amazing. It's a really good technique. Right, has anybody got an idea for a behavior you'd like every teacher in Latvia to do that would make a big difference to teaching in Latvia? Come on, you can't be shy, you're teachers. Come on, you're used to being in front of class. What was that? Open-minded. Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? That's really tough because that means something different to different people. But it is a very important behavior. See, if you took that open-mindedness, that's a level 2 behavior, you'd have to come up with granules which would give you an idea that that person was open-minded. You've got to go down that next level. What we actually found when we looked at all of these were very good at doing that level of comment. I want my nurses to show empathy. What they didn't then do was start to describe what that meant in practice. We call them the granules, the observable things which mean the person is being open-minded. And you have to have that, otherwise I can't give you a credit because you say I'm open-minded. I've got to see some signs of that. This is the hard bit. Anybody got another one? No? Patience. Boy, do we need patience. Yeah. So someone coming in late is just being patient, yeah? But I think patience, that's good. The one I would love to see is feedback. I would love every teacher to say at the end of every lesson to the class, how did it go? Feedback from your class. Crucial. Absolutely crucial. And I said to the previous minister in Egypt, if I could get all 1.2 million teachers saying, how did the lesson go? That's all I'd do, because I think things would improve from that point. Anyway, it got more complicated than that because we did come up with this framework idea. Anyway, the minister said, Dr. Shauki, who is now the minister, said, I'd like you to do this for 10,000 teachers. Now, my company's 3 people, so we now employ nearly 100 people in Egypt, right across the whole country, and we're running a system with the teachers to develop their behaviors. And the diet in Egypt for teachers is to turn up to things like this and be talked at. Right? Now, it's not very good, really. We need to have interaction, but that's what it's set up like, usually. But we don't do that. We allow them to choose the behaviors from our framework that we've developed with the Open University and choose the behaviors which they think would make the biggest difference to them personally. So it's a lot about choice and a lot about driving it. In fact, these are the subtopics which we have our granules from. And back in April, when we have finished the project, we've finished all 10,000. In fact, we've covered 14,000 teachers. Back in April, the teachers themselves had given around about 130,000 assessments, self-assessments, peer assessments, and independent ones. And you can see from the size of the rectangle the proportion of the credits that they were given themselves. And what I'm really pleased about is that there are behaviors that we put around communities of practice, because we are encouraging them not just to develop their own behaviors, but their behaviors with others. And you can see the biggest proportion of the credits is in the communities of practice area. So we're thrilled, absolutely thrilled that this is happening. Now, everybody says, what's the impact on the kids? I said, well, I'm not dealing with the kids. I'm dealing with the teachers, because I have this belief that if I can get the teachers working in a better way, then that will inculcate a better way that the students learn. What's actually happened is, I don't know if you know, Egypt's got a massive problem with dropout. By the time the students get to grade 10, I can't remember the dropout, but it's embarrassingly high. It's a big percentage of kids stop going to school. We've had kids going back to school who've already dropped out because they heard their teachers are actually saying to them, how did your lesson go? They're communicating with their students and things are changing. So attendance is going up, and we know that results will go up as a result as well. I don't know, do you know the Teaching and Learning International Survey, TALIS? It was last in, not 2105, it's a typo on my slide there, 2015. And I think they interview 130,000 teachers around the world about what it's like in their teaching today. And when you look at the questions which are around feedback, getting feedback to you as a professional about your teaching, then look at the impact that it has. Your confidence as a teacher, on average, rises by 70%. You're 4% or more motivated. 60-something% on average feel better job satisfaction. And over 50% think they've improved their knowledge. I'm not surprised at that, because people are pretty knowledgeable anyway. So I think working on the teacher behaviors and forming communities of practice will have its benefits and output because of these sort of surveys. And so it goes on. You know that a lot of people who go on courses that change their teaching practice, when you go back to school after a few months or a few weeks even, you just go back to the old style of teaching. If you get feedback continuously, 61% of teachers will change their practice. So this couldn't be more important, that we help teachers work in communities and we work with their behaviors. So the Egypt plan turned into the knowledge bank and the behavior library, and also the president has got a president's leadership program where 500 young people are now working in parliament to try to plug this big gap that they have in Egypt. And Teachers First is the first of the communities that we're working on. So basically, you have the framework of behaviors, which you can work out yourself. And when you get the slides, go back to school and see if you can construct your own behavior frameworks, because it's in the construction of the framework that you get a common understanding of what it is you want to do in your school. And we can also supply you with the one from Egypt if you want to have a starting point, or the one from that school. And build your communities of practice, and then allow people to self-credit and peer credit and assessor credit. Now, that becomes evidence, that pattern, right? We're not asking anybody to prove anything. We want to see self-credit, self-credit, peer, 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 self. And that pattern over time actually shows that you're trying to change. You're trying to change your attitudes and your habits. Now, do you have staff reviews every year? Do you have to meet your boss and talk about how you performed last year? Do you do that? It's certainly common in industry that once a year you meet in January with your boss and to talk about how you've performed over the last year and how you should be developing yourself for the year ahead. The next time you usually think about that is the following January. True? For most people. With a system like this, if I'm sitting down with Pete, I say, Pete, last year we thought that you would develop your behaviors in meetings because you're too quiet. You never say anything. I want to see you saying more. And you get to the next January and you say, yep, I've been doing that. And I've got a few friends to say, change that for continuous point of learning credits. And if I see that you did them all last Friday before the meeting today, I know that you haven't been taking this seriously. So this point of learning, giving people credit at the point of learning, is something I think we all need to think about, and that becomes the evidence because of the pattern. Now, one last thing now I just want to cover, because there's 1.2 million teachers in Egypt, and most of the meetings we had with senior officials said, you'll fail, it will never work. I know lots of teachers who will never do this. So I want to introduce you to something that I've known since 1980-something called swamp theory. Imagine that all of the teachers in your school, you're going to write their names in this rectangle. The left-hand scale is how able they are to change, how able they are. And the bottom scale is how willing they are to change. In other words, how much they want to be part of your community. So top right-hand corner are people who want to change and are able to change. They're willing and they're able. Now, as we're teachers, we often think about the bottom left-hand corner, the unwilling and unable people, and we want to try to rescue them. But I'm not talking about students, I'm talking about you, teachers. So how we deal with the top right-hand corner is entirely different to how we deal with people in other parts of this diagram. Now, it was when this was first described to me, I don't know, do you have cooking sheets, paper, which you can eat? You make a cake and you can eat it. We call it sugar paper in England. But I'm sure you have it. And the guy who was teaching this to us said, get a piece of this baking parchment and write the names of all of your staff where you think they are. Bottom left-hand corner, top left-hand corner, highly skilled, low on citizenship. That's called a prima donna. Somebody who's not interested in the community, but no, you need to know who the prima donnas are. And the reason why I said put it on cooking paper, he said it's best to eat this afterwards because if you leave it lying around and somebody finds it, you're in big trouble. So the thing is, when we're training our teachers in Egypt, we know that the first 10,000 they've already climbed the mountain and they're there. They're on the solid high ground. We then have to think about the teachers who are off the high ground. Sometimes they're motivated just by wanting to join the party. They don't even care. Sometimes they just need so much hand-holding, it's really hard work. Other people, you just need to find the right hook for teachers are as different as the students that we teach. We need to be differentiated in how we teach them. So there's lots of different people that we need to actually think about. And you think of it as reclaiming the swamp, one rocky bit of shore at a time. So once we have our first 10,000, we'll move to the next bit. And we'll move to the next bit. Now, have you heard of the concept of tipping point? You know, if 12% of people in Latvia start eating a certain chocolate bar, very soon everybody will be. There's a tipping point where things change. So in Egypt, we said to the minister, if we can get to about 130,000 teachers, we'll tip it and the whole system will change. Anyway, he said last week, do 500,000 and we'll get there. So that's what we're doing in Egypt. So I hope you found that interesting. The message is we need to build communities of practice if we want to improve and be world-class. Thank you for listening.